Frost hung on the fence wire like stitched lace. Marlena Boyson walked the tree line before sunrise, a headlamp strapped over her wool cap, dragging a dead oak log through the mud one length at a time. She'd count her steps between drags, 11 rest, 11 rest. Behind her, 40 more logs lay stacked in crooked rows, bark still damp from the rain 2 nights before. She knelt at each one, drilled a small round hole, tapped something white and waxy inside, then sealed it with a dab of melted candle wax. Over and over, log after log. A neighbor's porch light clicked on across the road. A curtain moved. By March, there were over 300 logs laid out behind the old dairy barn like a strange wooden graveyard, each one drilled, plugged, and waxed shut. Marlena never explained herself to anyone who asked. She just kept hauling, kept drilling, kept disappearing down into the old spring cave beneath the barn floor with a lantern and a notebook, sometimes not coming up for hours. Townsfolk driving past on Route 9 slowed their trucks to stare. One woman said it looked like the young widow was digging her own grave and burying it in pieces. What she was actually building, not one soul in Belhaven County could have guessed. Before we get into what Marlena was really doing out there in the dark, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss where this story lands, because the ending changed how an entire county thought about her. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know what town or city you're watching this from tonight. I read everyone. Cutter's Ridge sits in the low hollows of Belhaven County, Missouri, a place where the fog doesn't lift off the creek bottoms until nearly 10 in the morning. The dairy farm at the end of Springhouse Road had sat empty for 6 years by the time Marlena Boyson bought it. The barn roof caved in on one corner, the milking parlor stripped bare, 55 acres gone to thistle and broom sedge. She'd bought it not at a regular sale, but off the county's back tax auction block, the kind of sale where nobody expects the land to ever produce anything again. The county clerk, a sharp-tongued woman named Fawn Adair, had warned her plainly the day she signed. "You understand the redemption clause," Fawn had said, sliding the papers across the counter without looking up. "1 year. You've got to show this county a working agricultural operation, verified and sold through the co-op certification fair, or that deed goes right back on the auction block. Same as it did to the last 3 families who tried this place." Marlena had only nodded and signed her name in a steady hand. She had $11,000 to her name, a boy of 9 named Silas, and a farm nobody in 3 counties believed could be saved. She moved into the farmhouse in October, patching the kitchen ceiling with tin she found in the collapsed hay barn. At night she cooked cornbread on a wood stove that smoked if the wind came from the west, and Silas did his schoolwork by an oil lamp because the electric company wanted $600 just to restring the line. Her closest neighbor, a retired dairyman named Odell Kessler, watched her chop wood from his own porch most evenings, arms folded, saying nothing. He'd farmed that valley for 40 years. He knew what 55 acres of broom sedge and a caved-in barn were worth. Nothing, less than nothing, with a year on the clock. It was Odell who finally crossed the road one gray afternoon in November, boots crunching over frozen mud, and found Marlena kneeling beside another dead log with a drill in her hand. "You do know," he said, "that ain't firewood you're wasting. That's good oak, and you're punching holes in it like it owes you money." Marlena didn't stop drilling. "I'm not burning it," she said. "I'm feeding it." Odell squinted at the little white plugs she was tapping into each hole. "Feeding it what?" She only smiled and reached for the next log. What Odell didn't know, what nobody in Cutter's Ridge knew yet, was that Marlena had spent 3 years before her husband's death working weekends at a mycology co-op 2 counties over, learning how shiitake and lion's mane mushrooms could be grown on hardwood logs, inoculated with spawn and left to fruit in shaded, humid ground. It was slow. It was strange to look at. And it required almost nothing but patience, water, and darkness, which was exactly why she'd started clearing out the old spring cave beneath the dairy barn, a limestone hollow that stayed a steady 54 degrees no matter the season outside. She hauled buckets of creek water down into that cave every evening after Sela's went to bed, misting rows of logs she'd stacked along the old milking troughs, checking a thermometer nailed to the stone wall by lantern light. Above ground, the farm looked like failure. Below ground, in the dark, something was quietly beginning to work. But mushrooms alone wouldn't satisfy the co-op certification board, and Marlena knew it. So she started something else down there too. Wheels of soft cheese, made from 2 Jersey cows she'd bought on credit, set to age on cedar boards in that same cool cave air. By January, word had gotten around the valley that the widow Boyson was running some kind of operation in a hole in the ground, and most folks found it more funny than mysterious. At the feed store, a clerk named Thaddeus Byon, who also served as the county's agricultural inspector, laughed when Odell described it to him. Mushrooms and cheese, growing in the dark under a busted-down dairy barn, Thad said, shaking his head as he rang up Odell's order. That woman's got 1 year to show this county a working farm, and she's playing in a cave. I give her till spring before she's back at that auction table. The setback came in February, and it came hard. A cold snap dropped the cave's temperature 4 degrees below what the mushroom spawn could tolerate, and Marlena came down one morning to find nearly 60 of her logs gone soft and black with the wrong kind of mold, a full third of her stock, ruined in a single week. She sat on an overturned bucket in that cold stone room for a long while, lantern guttering, Silas's voice calling faintly from the house above. She'd spent nearly all her remaining cash on spawn and cheese cultures. There was no more money left to replace what she'd lost. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and the co-op certification calendar, counting weeks instead of dollars. 10 weeks until the fair. 10 weeks to salvage what was left, get the cheese wheels turned and aged proper, and somehow convince a skeptical board that a widow with a caved-in barn and a hole in the ground deserved to keep her land. Silas found her there past midnight and asked if they were going to lose the farm. Marlena didn't answer that directly. She only said, "Get your boots. We've got logs to sort before the sun's up." She and Silas spent the next 3 days hauling out every ruined log by hand, scrubbing the cave walls with vinegar water, rebuilding a thermometer rig from spare parts Odell grudgingly, without saying much left leaning against her porch rail one morning. She replanted what spawn she could still afford, spacing the new logs tighter, insulating the cave mouth with straw bales stacked 3 deep. She didn't have room left for a second mistake. Through March she barely left that hillside, checking moisture levels twice a day, turning cheese wheels by hand, watching the calendar shrink from 10 weeks to 6, from 6 to 3. By late April, the first shiitake caps had broken through the bark on a dozen logs, small and brown and curled like little umbrellas caught in wind. The cheese wheels had rinded over nicely, smelling of stone and grass. Marlena finally allowed herself to believe it might work. The county certification fair was set for the second Saturday of May, 9 days before her 1-year deadline expired. She loaded the truck with sample crates the night before, checked the weather report twice, and told Silas to sleep. Neither of them noticed the flood watch the radio mentioned, quiet and easy to miss, tucked between songs. The rain started Friday night and didn't stop. By Saturday dawn, Springhouse Road had 4 inches of standing water and Cutter's Creek had jumped its banks entirely, spilling brown and fast across half the valley's bottomland. Marlena stood on her porch in her nightclothes watching the water climb toward the barn, certain in that moment that everything above ground, the truck, the crates, the road to the fairgrounds, was about to be lost. Odell came sloshing across the flooded yard in waders, shouting over the rain that the low fields on 3 farms were already underwater, crops gone, roads impassable for miles. Marlena didn't think. She ran for the cave. Silas ran behind her, and together they hauled the sample crates down the stone steps instead of out to the truck, deep into the one place on 55 acres the water couldn't reach. When she finally climbed back up, soaked through, the yard above looked like a lake. The truck sat axle deep. The road was gone. She sat down hard on the cave steps, certain the deadline, the fair, the entire year of work had just washed away in a single Saturday morning. It was Thaddeus Byon who found her there, wadding up Spring House Road on foot 2 hours later with a clipboard held over his head against the last of the rain, sent by the co-op board to check on farms too flooded to make the fair. He expected to find nothing worth writing down. Instead, Odell led him around the drowned barn and down the stone steps into the cave, where lantern light showed rows of shiitake logs still standing dry, cheese wheels still resting untouched on their cedar boards, the whole operation exactly as it had been the day before the storm. Thad stood there a long moment, rainwater dripping off his clipboard, saying nothing at first. Then he crouched down beside a log, ran a thumb along one curled brown cap and looked up at Marlena. "Whole valley just lost its topsoil," he said quietly, "and you're standing on the only working farm in this county that didn't lose a thing." He didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. He simply started writing on his clipboard, faster now, while behind him, Odell stood in the cave mouth, staring at the rows of logs like he was seeing them for the first time. Word of what Thad found in that cave reached the fairgrounds before the flood water even finished receding. By Sunday afternoon, trucks began rolling slowly up the ruined stretch of Spring House Road anyway, parking where the mud allowed, folks walking the rest on foot just to see it for themselves. Fawn Adair came out from the county office in rubber boots, clipboard in hand for the redemption paperwork nobody expected to need filling out early. Neighbors who'd driven past all winter shaking their heads at the log piles stood now at the cave mouth, quiet, looking at rows of mushrooms and aged cheese that had outlasted the worst flood the valley had seen in a decade. Odell Kessler stood near the back of the small crowd that Sunday, hat pulled low against a last drizzle, watching Marlena hand cheese samples to strangers with mud still crusted on her boots. He didn't say much. He never did. But the following week, without being asked, he showed up at her fence line with a truckload of split cedar for new curing racks, and he kept coming back after that, most mornings, same time she used to walk that tree line alone. The co-op certified the farm 2 weeks later, right on schedule, the mushroom logs and cave-aged cheese standing as the only agricultural product in 3 flooded townships that reached market that spring. Marlena paid off her spawn debt by June and had her first real harvest wagon rolling into the county market by July, Sela's riding beside her, boots finally dry. Fawn Adair still keeps that original deed on file, redemption clause and all, though nobody in Belhaven County talks anymore about sending it back to auction. These days, when folks drive past Spring House Road and see the barn roof patched, the fields green again, they remember the winter they laughed at a widow drilling holes into dead wood, and they don't laugh the same way now. What Marlena Boyson understood, long before anyone else in that valley did, was simple enough once you saw it proven. The ground above can flood and burn and fail you entirely, but sometimes what saves a farm isn't what grows toward the sun. Sometimes it's what you were patient enough to grow in the dark.